Hey, welcome back to class number 2. Alright, you might have heard the terms UI and UX, and those have to be good in your application, but have you heard this term called DX? Let me know in the comments if you have. If you haven't, DX is developer experience. And right now we don't have a really good one, because our type definitions are all in the index, and these will grow bigger, and our resolvers as well are in the index. And each time we have to restart our server, we have to do it manually. Let's fix these before we dive into more functionality. So these type defs will be in their own file. So here I'll create a folder, call it GraphQL. And here I'll create a file, call it typedefs.js. So here I'm gonna cut these type defs, paste them here. We need to bring GQL, so we're gonna say const GQL equals require. You can import it from Apollo server as well, because GraphQL tag is just a sub-dependency of that as well, and we need to export this. So we'll say module.exports equals GQL blah blah blah. Alright, so here we need to import those. So here we'll say const typedefs equals require, and we require, what is it, GraphQL / typedefs. And the resolvers as well. And for the resolvers, I'm gonna divide them. We're gonna have the resolvers for posts in their own file, and the resolvers for users in their own file as well, because otherwise we're gonna have one massive file with all the resolvers. So here I'll create a folder, call it resolvers. I've said resolvers like 10 times. Resolvers. I'll create an index.js, and I'll come back to this. And here I'll create a post.js and users.js, and let's go back to our index. So here, let's cut this. Actually, let's just cut this, or just this query. Remove this, and here in the, where is it, the posts, let's say module.exports equals this object, and it's gonna have a query. Actually no, we copied the query, we just paste that in. We need the post module or model, so we'll say const post equals require. We go back one level, actually we'll go back 2 levels to model/post. Alright, and we need a way to combine all of these resolvers. So here in the index, we want to import that post resolver, so we'll say const. Of course, it's the default export, so we can name it anything. So we'll call them posts resolvers like this. Alright, here we get them from the same directory, posts, and let's import the users resolvers as well while we're here. Resolvers, even though it's empty right now. So we'll say from users, and here we'll export this object. So we'll say module.exports. So this object will combine both of them. We'll say query. For now we have just query from post resolvers. So we'll say we'll do the spread operator, posts resolvers dot query, and here we'll say mutation. Actually, we don't have any mutations right now. We'll just leave it like that, and because right now we only have this one query. Alright, so now our type defs are there, and our resolvers are there, so we need to import these resolvers. So we don't need this post model anymore. We can get rid of that and say const resolvers equals require, and we say /GraphQL/resolvers. Because it's in the index, we don't need to say anything more. And the names are still the same, so everything should work the same. We don't need GQL anymore here. And let's save everything. Let's stop the development server. And actually, now I want to install NodeMon. You probably have heard of this module or a library. If you haven't, it's just something that starts a Node application, and whenever we change any file within this directory, it restarts the server for us. So I'm going to say npm install -D as a, so it installs as a dev dependency, and say NodeMon. And here I'll write a script for it. So I'll say the script start will say NodeMon index.js, or we can just say index. Alright, I'll save that. I'll wait for it to finish. Okay, now that it's done, we can just say npm start. Alright, it started, and let's test out our query. Alright, oh, it's so instant that I think that it's not actually sending it. Let me make sure. Yeah, okay, it is sending that query. Alright, so everything is working the same. Now we can get going with the rest of the functionality. So before implementing the rest of the CRUD functionalities on our posts, like creating posts and editing them or deleting them, let's actually create ways for our users to authenticate, because the create and delete posts actions or resolvers have to be from protected user or authenticated users. So let's actually start with registering users. So first thing is we add an actual query for or mutation for that. So here we'll say mutation or type mutation, because this is making a change in our database. So here we'll say register, and here we can have input from our users as arguments and take that and do stuff with it in our business logic. So here we can say that we can take a username, a password, a confirmed password, and an email, but we can create a type for that as well if we don't want this to be a massive line here. So I'll say register input like this of type register register input with a capital R like this, and I'll create that type here. So I'll say and this is not a type, this is an input, which is a different type of type, which is given as an input to a resolver for it to return something for us. So here I'll say type register input, and this will have the 4 fields. So username of type string, and it's going to be required, a password of type string, required again, a confirmed password, because again this is for the register form, so we need the confirmed passwords as well. So, and we need the email as well. We'll say string and it's required. Alright, and this needs to return something, so it will return a type user. So let's create this user, and it's required. So let's say type user, and this will have an ID of type ID, and it will have an email of type string. And by the way, even if we specify required, it doesn't mean that the user has to get these, you know, that means we have to return them from our resolver, but the user can still opt out from not getting these. So it will return an authentication token, and it will return what else? The username of the user, which is a string, and the created @ Alright, so let's actually implement this resolver for this register. And here I'll go here. Actually here, let's add a mutation field, mutation, and this will take from the user's resolver that mutation object, which we haven't created yet, but we will. So let's save this and close it. Let's go to our users here. We'll need our user mongoose model. So we'll say const user equals require, and we go back 2 levels to models /user, and here we'll say module.exports, and we'll export this object, and for now we'll have a mutation. And here we need to implement our resolver for the register, so we'll say register, and now this needs to take some input. And we have 4 things that we can get in our resolver arguments. So the first will be parent. I'll explain these in a second. The second is args, arguments. The third will be context, and the fourth will be info. Most of the time we'll just be using args, but parent it gives you the result of what was the input from the last step, but here it will be undefined because there was no step before this. But in some cases you could have multiple resolvers, so data goes from one resolver and then it goes to the other, and then it goes to the other, and then it gets processed in different ways and then returned to the user. But here we don't need it, so we can just say underscore like this, so it doesn't, you know, take up any space. So arguments. Here, this is these arguments from here. It's this register input. So args right now for this resolver will have a register input, and inside of that we'll have these 4 fields. And here we have context, which I'll explain later. You'll see what this does. And info just has some general information about some metadata that we actually almost never need. All right, so here, inside of here, we're going to have a couple of steps. What we need to do, I'm going to put a couple of to-dos and come back to them. So the first thing is we need to validate the data. So let's say validate user data. And this means like we could have empty fields, so we need to make sure to have server validation in case we have some problems like passwords don't match, email already exists, etc. In our case, emails are not unique, but usernames are, so we need to check for that. So we will do a special check for that because we need to check in our database. So here we'll say make sure user doesn't already exist. And then the first step will be to hash the password before we store it in our database, of course, and create an authentication token. So an auth token. All right, so we will skip the validation for now. We'll come back to it later. And let's first hash the password and return the data to our user. For this, we're going to install two packages. So I'll say npm install. First will be bcrypt.js and JSON web token. So bcrypt will help us crypt the password, and JSON web token will help us encode some data in a token and return it to our user. So here we need to get that data that the user sent. We can destructure it here, but we can as well do it here. I prefer destructuring from here. So here we can say curly braces to destructure from the args. And we need to further destructure the register input. So we'll say register input : and here we'll get our fields. So we'll have our username, we have an email, the password, and the confirm password. Like this, let prettier format it. And now we have access to these four fields separately. So here we'll say, we'll edit the password, we'll change the value to it to the hashed password. So we'll say await, because the bcrypt function, the hashing function, is actually asynchronous. So we need to add as well the async keyword here to the function. And we'll say await bcrypt. Actually, we need to import it. Let's import both right now. So we'll say const bcrypt equals require bcrypt.js. And we'll get the JSON web token. So we'll say const jwt equals require JSON web token. All right. So here we'll say await bcrypt.hash, and this will take the password, and it will ask us for the number of rounds. Usually 12 is a good number based on what I've seen. So const, here we want to form our user object. So we will say const new user equals, and we will call new user our model, and we'll pass it the data that we have. So the email will be email, so we don't need to say email. Username, username, and the password as well will be password. So we keep these fields like that, and we need to have a created at. So this will be new date, and we need to change the to isostring method to convert it to a string. So here we'll say const result equals await new user.save to the database. And now we need to return this data to the user. But before that, we need to actually create a token for our user. So here we'll say const token, token equals jwt.sign. And this will take some data, like a payload, to put inside the token. And we want to encode the ID. So this will be result.id. We want to encode the email. This will be result.email. And the username as well. So res.username. And here we need to give it a secret. And let's actually store this secret in the config file as well, so we don't have it in our Git repository. We don't make a mistake by sharing it with people. So I'm going to import it. Before creating it, I'll say const secret key, like this, equals require. We go back 2 levels to the config file, and let's go to that config file and create an entry here and say secret key equals some very secret key. I don't know. It doesn't matter. This will be used as the key to encrypt your encode your token. So only our server will be able to decode this stuff. Here I'll give an array of options, and actually here the secret goes here, so secret key, and the third parameter will be some options, and I only need the option of expires in to give it a an expiration time, which is going to be 1h for 1 hour. So now let's say return. Here we want to spread the data of our user, so we'll say spread res dot underscore doc, where our document is stored. I want to give the ID because it's not by default in a doc, so we'll say res ID equals res dot underscore ID, and we want to give the token as well. So let's save all of this and see if this is working. Let's go to our app, and here we can say mutation. We can actually do this in a new tab, say mutation, and this will be register, and we'll take a register input, which is going to be this object that will have a username, username of user, we'll have a password of 1 2 3 through 6, a confirm password of 1 through 6, and an email of user@email.com. Let's send this. Oh, actually we need to get some fields back, so let's open curly braces and let's get all of them. So the ID, email, token, what is it, username, and what else, the created at. Right, let's send this. There we go, we get our ID, email, everything, our authentication token, and if we look at our database and we refresh, we see this users collection was created, and it's got one document which has the details for our user. Cool, so we're now successfully registering users. But of course right now, if we send this request, it was where register another user with the same username. Of course we don't want that, so let's actually make sure that this doesn't happen. So let's go to our app. Right here we need to get a user, so this is done, so we can remove this to do. And by the way, you can get this to do, where is it, to do highlight extension to have this highlight that. Alright, so here we'll say const user equals user dot find one, and here we need to pass a filter or a condition, and this condition will be the username has to be like the username, so we can just pass it like this. And of course this is asynchronous, so we need to say wait, and here we'll say if user. So if there is a user, this is not going to be null. If not, it's going to be null. So if user, then we need to return an error because user already exists. We can just say throw error, but we can as well use specific errors from Apollo. So we can import those. So we say import. I'm going to import the user input error. This will become useful when we it's because later Apollo client will be able to recognize the type of error and handle it differently. So here we'll say require Apollo server, and here we'll say throw new what is it, user bad input or input error, and this will say username is taken. And actually we're gonna pass a payload with our errors that we will use as well on the client. So the payload will have an errors object, and inside of here it will have a username key, and this will say this username is taken. This errors object will be used later on our front end to display these errors on the form. And actually right here, this info and context, we're not using them, so we can just omit them. We still have to say to use the parent one to have the access to the args. Alright, let's save this and let's check on our playground and let's send this request. And there we go, it says username is taken, and if I do another username, say John, we can keep everything else the same, and we send, and it actually registers John, and if I send again, it doesn't register John because that username is taken. Alright, let's now implement some validation as well, because right now if we just submit some empty fields, it's still gonna register the, you know, a user with an empty username and all that stuff. Of course we don't want that. So let's go here, let's create a folder here called util for utilities, and I'm gonna create a file inside of it, call it validators, validators.js, and here I'll import a function. So here we'll say module.export, or I'll export rather, and here I'll call it validate register input, and this will take the 4 fields, so username, email, password, confirm password, and that's it. And it will okay, I set this to be an arrow function, so I'll do this. So here we'll do const errors equals an empty object for now, and we'll say if username dot trim equals an empty string. So if username is empty, we'll say errors dot username equals username must not be empty. Here, let's copy this. Let's do the same thing for email. So Control D here and say email. So if email is empty, we'll say email must not be empty. But as well, even if email is not empty, we need to check if it's a valid email. So here I'll say const regex, and I'm gonna match this string to a regular expression that checks that this string is an email. I'm gonna put this in this description. You'll find this in the description. So now I'm just gonna paste it in, and here I'll say if not email.match, and we pass this regex. So if it doesn't match this regular expression, that means it's not in a format, it's not in a pattern of an email. So we'll say, actually not errors, errors.email equals email must be a valid email address, like this. We need to check the password, so we'll say if password dot trim equals empty string. Or actually, for password, we don't add the trim, we can have white spaces as part of the password, that's fine. And we'll say errors dot password equals password must not be empty. And if the password is not empty, we need to make sure that the password is the same as the confirmed password. So here we'll say else, or we'll say else if password does not equal confirmed password. So we'll say errors dot confirm password equals passwords must match. If you've seen any of my tutorials before for validation, this is a pattern that I always use. So here I'll say return, and we're gonna return the errors and a value for valid, and this will be object. So this valid, if it's true, that means there's no errors. So we'll say object.keys, and we pass the errors dot length. So if the length of object.keys of errors is smaller than 1, that means there is no errors inside of this. So the data is valid. So let's save this. Let's go to our users and bring this in. So here we'll say const validate what is it? Register input, and this is const equals require, and go back 2 levels to util / validators. And actually we need destructuring because it's not the default export. And here under here we'll say const, and we'll get the valid and errors from, so equals validate register input, and we want to pass all these fields. So here we'll pass them like this, and we get that data. So we remove the to-dos because this is done now. And here we'll say if not valid, then we want to return these errors. That means we have some errors. So we'll say throw new user input error, and we'll just say errors here. This doesn't matter, but we want to pass a payload with the object errors, so with the name errors and with the value of those errors. So here we'll save. Let's check our app, and here we send empty fields and we'll check. So it says validate register input is not a function. I just misspelled this, register. Let's try again. Alright, we get errors and we get that the username is not must not be empty and the password must not be empty. So if we put some stuff in the username, we'll get that the password must not be empty, and if we put passwords that don't match, we get that they don't match. And if we put an email that's not valid, we get that email must be valid. If we revert that change and we put passwords that match, oops, we actually go through. Cool, and we get our user. Nice. Let's actually quickly implement the login functionality. Actually, for this I'm going to create a validator for login data as well. So we'll say module.exports .validate login input, and this will take only two things, so username and password, and then it will have the same as the other one, an empty errors object, and we'll say we can just copy this and paste it twice. So if username, then username must not be empty, and then if password, and password must not be empty. This needs to be capital P, and here we'll do the same. We'll return errors and that, and now prettier we'll format it. And let's copy that. Let's go to our users. Here we want to import it as well. So here we'll say, put it next to that. And of course, before we create our mutation, we need to add it to our type definitions. So here we'll say login. We'll take, we don't need the type because it only takes two things. So we'll take a username of type string and required, and a password of type string and it's required as well, and it will return a user and that's required. Let's save. Let's go back. Here in our mutation we'll say async login, login. It will take so it will take the parent, we don't need that, so we'll do that underscore, and here we'll destructure username and password. And remember, because we have them straight away as arguments in the type defs, whereas here we don't need to actually destructure them from a type. Alright, so here we'll say const errors and valid equals validate login input, and we pass the username and the password. Actually, let's put a comma here so that squiggly line goes away. And here we'll say we need to get this user from the database, because if it doesn't exist, we need to return an error because we can't log in a new user that doesn't exist. So here we'll say const user equals await user dot find one, and the condition will be the username must equal the username, so just be username like that. And here it will say if not user, so if this user doesn't exist, we need to throw an error. But this will be a different error. This is not an error for the fields themselves. This is another error. So I'm gonna give it its own name. So we'll say errors.general equals user not found. And here I'll say throw new. What is it? User input error. And I'll just say wrong creds or credentials, and pass an object with the object errors in it. Else we want to compare this password to the actual password of the user to make sure that the password is correct. So we'll say const match, and we'll say await bcrypt. We'll use bcrypt again to compare them. bcrypt.compare, and we're going to compare the password to the password of the user, so to user.password. And here it will say if not match. If they don't match, then we want to return an error again. So we'll do actually here it's not wrong credentials, here it's user not found. user not found. We'll copy the same stuff. Here we'll say, here it's actually here that's wrong credentials, so wrong credentials, like that. And if we get here, that means the user has successfully logged in. I mean, the password is correct. So let's actually issue a token for them. So we'll say const token, and we need to use the same function from here. So let's actually make this into its own function. Let's copy this code, and I'm gonna create a function here, a helper function. We'll say const or function generate token. And you will take a user and you will return this jws.sign, and you will replace res with user, and it will return us a token with this data. So here, let's copy this. So here we'll say token equals generate token from res, and let's copy this. Let's go up here. Do the same here, but here we called it user, so it will generate token from user, and it will return the same data that we returned here. So we can just copy this and go up here. We will return the token, except here the user is called user and not response or result. All right, let's save this, and let's see if our validation is working and our red login resolver is working. So here we'll say mutation login, and this will take a username, which is going to be user, and the password, which is going to be, actually let's leave them empty to test out the validation. And here let's get all fields. So email, token, username, and created at send. Okay. Oh, because we have actually a user that's got a username and a password of empty strings. Plus, I forgot to throw an error if the valid is false from the validation. I'm not even using that value. So here, before we find the user, we want to say if not valid. Then here we want to throw the same type of error, and here we'll say we'll just say errors and pass this errors here. Let's save. If I go back here, I should get some errors. Okay, the development server didn't start. Okay, it started now. Send the same query, and there we go. We get errors, username must not be empty, and if I put user here, that goes away, but we still get password must not be empty, and we do 1 2 3 4 to 7. That's a wrong password. We'll say wrong credentials, and if I put the correct password, it should log us in. And it does. Cool. Alright, so we're done with authentication. This has been a long one, but we've done quite a lot. Now we've refactored our app. Our DX developer experience is going to be much, much better. Alright, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye.